All right. So have you ever felt like, that feeling of wanting to control everything, but also kind of wanting to just let go? It's something we all struggle with, but it gets really interesting when you start thinking about it with faith, particularly like the Christian life, you know?
Oh, yeah, it really is a fascinating paradox, isn't it? Like this tension between our human nature wanting so much control, and then faith often kind of asks for the opposite, like surrender.
Exactly. And that's what we're diving into today. It's this excerpt from a Chinese Christian text. It's called "无常."
Oh, wow.
And that translates to "let it go," the necessary path to maturity.
I like that title.
Yeah, it's good, right? So it uses this whole concept of letting go, or Yoshin Chinese, to kind of unpack these deep questions we all have about personal growth and parenting, even God's role in our lives,
Yeah, for sure.
Full disclosure, I went into this thinking, okay, another piece about letting go. But then the author totally hooked me with this story about their kids sneaking out to internet cafes, and they knew it was happening, but they decided not to confront them directly.
That's a powerful example of the tension between wanting to protect and guide our children and then giving them the freedom to make their own choices, even when those choices lead to mistakes.
Right. It made me think, would I have the guts to do that? Like to step back and trust that maybe there's like a bigger lesson happening that I just can't see in the moment.
It's a scary thought, but the author makes this argument that letting go, like that isn't about being passive or neglecting your responsibilities. It's more about trusting that God is working even when things seem messy,
Yeah. That's where it gets tricky for me. Because if God has control, if he has allowing these things to happen, then doesn't that make you feel like he's abandoning us in a way?
It's a valid feeling for sure, and it's one the text actually talks about by looking at Romans 1. That chapter describes God seemingly letting go of humanity and letting them face the consequences of their choices.
Yeah, okay, I get that. But that whole passage always makes me kind of squirm. If God is all loving, then why would he just stand back and watch us mess things up so badly?
Well, the author puts it all within the context of free will, which is a core principle. In the Christian faith, God gives us the freedom to choose, even if those choices lead us away from him. It's a concept theologians often call tough love.
So it's not about God punishing us or not caring about our suffering. It's more about him respecting our ability to make our own decisions, even the bad ones.
Exactly. And the text doesn't shy away from talking about the consequences of those bad decisions either. The author lists out all the negative behaviors described in Romans 1.2931, things like greed, envy, deceit, hatred. It's a pretty bleak picture of humanity, honestly.
Yeah. And then they ask if those behaviors are any different from what we see in the world today centuries later. And let's be honest, the answer is a big nope. It kind of makes you wonder if we're really making any progress at all.
It's a sobering thought. But the text doesn't leave us there in despair. It goes on to say that this letting go on God's part isn't abandonment. It's actually a deliberate act meant to lead us toward transformation and a deeper relationship with him.
So it's not like God's throwing in the towel and saying, good luck, humanity, you're on your own. It's more about setting the stage for us to come back to him or something.
The author uses this analogy of a parent who allows their child to make mistakes because they know those experiences will help them grow and mature,
But if that's true, wouldn't it be easier if God just stepped in and stopped us from making those mistakes in the first place?
Why all the drama and heartache?
That's where this idea of sanctification comes in, you see. It's the process of becoming more Christ-like. And sometimes that means you got to go through difficult experiences that kind of refine us. Like, think of it like refining gold. It needs that heat and purification to get rid of the impurities,
Okay, I think I'm following you.
Yeah.
But are you saying that God, intentionally puts us through tough times? Doesn't that make him seem kind of, harsh? It's not that he creates those situations to be cruel or anything. It's more like he allows us to face those challenges and even consequences because it's part of our spiritual growth. Remember the fruits of the Spirit mentioned in Galatians 5? Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. All of these are qualities that we usually develop through trials and hardship, you see.
So it's like saying those experiences, even the painful ones, are actually chances for us to cultivate those Christ-like qualities. It's a bit like no pain, no gain, but on a spiritual level.
That's a good way to put it. And it's not just some abstract theological concept either. The author shares this really personal story about rebelling against their parents' guidance when they were younger. They even ran away from home at one point.
Whoa, that's intense. Did they ever end up seeing their parents' perspective?
They did, but it took some time and some hard lessons along the way. The author talks about how those experiences, even though they were difficult, ultimately led to a deeper understanding of their parents' love and wisdom. And they connect that back to our relationship with God, suggesting that sometimes we need those prodigal son moments to really appreciate his grace and guidance.
Okay, that makes sense. But how does that fit with the idea of God being a loving father who wants the best for his children? It still feels like there's a disconnect.
The author addresses that by using this really cool analogy of Jesus playing chess with our lives.
Ooh, I like a good analogy. Break this one down for me.
They suggest that even when our moves seem like mistakes, even when it feels like we're losing the game, God's got a strategy that goes way beyond what we can see. We might not always understand his moves, but we can trust that the master chess player, he knows what he's doing.
So it's less about us being in control of every little thing and more about surrendering to his overall plan, even if it doesn't make sense to us right away.
Exactly. And that takes a lot of trust, which can be tough, especially when you're going through rough times. But the author argues that this surrender, this letting go, that's actually the key to finding true freedom and peace.
That's a pretty bold statement. It almost sounds counterintuitive, like surrendering our control somehow gives us more freedom. How does that work?
Think about it this way. When we're always trying to control every single thing, we end up carrying all this anxiety and fear. We're constantly worrying about what might go wrong, always trying to force things to go our way. But when we surrender to God's plan, when we choose to trust his guidance, even when it doesn't make sense, we let go of that burden. We free ourselves from that constant need to be in control, you see.
Okay, I get what you're saying. It's like trading that white-knuckle grip on the steering wheel and hopping in the passenger seat, trusting that the driver knows where they're going. But even then, isn't there a part of us that wants to hold on just in case?
Of course. It's totally natural to be afraid of what we don't know, to resist letting go of control, especially when it comes to the things that matter most to us. But the text asks us to consider this. What are we holding on to so tight that we're blocking God from working in our lives? What could we gain if we let go?
Those are some tough questions. And honestly, I don't know if I have the answers right now, but this conversation is making me think about those areas in my own life where maybe I'm holding on a little too tight.
And that's a great starting point, isn't it? Recognizing those places where we resist surrendering, where we're trying to play God instead of trusting his guidance.
It makes you wonder, if we're being honest with ourselves, what would those areas be? For the listener, I mean, what are those things, relationships, outcomes that we're desperately trying to control? Maybe it's a career path, a relationship, or even just a certain image we want to project to the world.
And the challenge is to ask ourselves, what would it look like to loosen our grip on those things? To surrender them to God and trust that his plan, even if it's different from ours, is ultimately for our good.
This whole idea of surrendering our control can feel so vulnerable. Are there any practical ways we can actually start doing that? I mean, it's easy to talk about letting go, but how do we actually live it out in our everyday lives? Where do we even begin? I mean, it feels like a constant process, right? This letting go thing. The author doesn't really give us a simple formula or anything, but they do talk about starting with prayer.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Bringing those areas where we're holding on so tight to God, acknowledging the struggle and asking him for help and letting go. It's like we're inviting God into the whole process, seeking his guidance and being open to the possibility that his plan might live different from what we have in mind.
Yeah, it's kind of like admitting we're not always the best driver and handing over the reins. But what about when those fears start creeping in? Like, what if we let go and everything falls apart? What if surrendering our will leads to pain or disappointment?
Those fears are totally natural. But the author reminds us that fear doesn't come from God. They even quote a verse from Isaiah 41:10. It says, "So do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand."
It's a good reminder that even when we're full of doubt and fear, God's right there to support us, to guide us, to give us the strength to keep going.
And it's important to remember that surrendering to God's will doesn't mean you'll never experience pain or hardship. We still live in a broken world, and we're still going to face challenges.
Right. It's not like a magic spell for a perfect life.
Yeah.
So if it's not about avoiding pain, then what is it about?
The author suggests that it's about finding meaning and purpose in the middle of those challenges. It's about trusting that God can even use our toughest experiences to shape us, to refine us, and to draw us closer to him.
I'm starting to see how this letting go thing is more than just a nice-sounding self-help idea. It's actually a deeply spiritual practice, It's a way of aligning our lives with God's will and trusting that he's working everything together for good.
Yeah, it's a fundamental shifting perspective. It's about moving away from that need for control and fear and moving towards surrender and trust. And it's a journey that takes time, practice, and a whole lot of grace.
So to kind of sum it all up, it seems like the big takeaway is that letting go, surrendering our control, and trusting God's plan, it's tough, it's messy, and often it doesn't make sense. But it's the path to real freedom, real growth, and a deeper relationship with God.
That's a great way to put it. It's not about becoming passive or giving up. It's about actively choosing to trust God's guidance, even when it goes against our own desires or what we thought was best.
This whole conversation has really got me thinking about the areas in my own life where I'm holding on too tight, where I'm resisting surrender.
And as you keep thinking about these ideas, I encourage you, our listener, to do the same. Ask yourself those tough questions.
Yeah.
What are you holding on to so tightly that you're actually blocking God from working in your life? What might you gain if you let go?
And remember, you don't have to figure this all out by yourself. Take those questions to God in prayer. Ask for His guidance, ask for His help in letting go, and trust that He will be there for you in those moments of surrender.
Letting go is a journey, and it's often in the letting go that we discover who we really are and whose we truly are.
Well said. Until next time, may you find the courage to let go and the grace to grow in your walk with God.